policy. That was never in our contract with ECO. I think that this is the most high-level effort by any government that I've experienced to limit our freedom of expression. And I think that's a very sad irony given the Netherlands' historic commitment to human rights. Clearly, of course, this message was unacceptable to us, and the electronic intifada continued to do its work without any regard whatsoever to the Dutch government or its efforts to impose an agenda on us. And I'm pleased to say that as a result, we increased our coverage of Dutch government policy in Palestine, and particularly its negative effects on the struggle for human rights. And we will certainly continue to focus on the role of the Netherlands as much as we can. And just to conclude on this particular issue, I want to note that ECO became, in a sense, the primary target of the attack. But I think it is about more than just ECO. It's really, I think, a question for the whole of Dutch civil society, what relationship non-government organizations and civil society should have with the state. Does the Netherlands want to remain a society in which people are free to pursue their conscience, to support human rights, even in cases where it defies Dutch government policy? Or do they want the Netherlands to turn into a country like Egypt under Hosni Mubarak, where non-governmental organizations, in order to receive funding or to receive a license or to be allowed to operate without harassment, should follow the line of the party that's in power? And I think that is really the broader question for people in this country, because what we see going on in the Netherlands is part of a global phenomenon. Recently, we've reported about this on the Electronic Intifada, that similar attacks are going on in the United States. It's all quite well coordinated. It goes back to the report from the Reut Institute that I mentioned, that Israel needs to fight delegitimization, to fight what it calls the delegitimization of Israel, but what we call solidarity with Palestinian human rights, and to do so through any means necessary, including the kinds of attacks we saw in the Netherlands. And I think it also reminds us of the importance that we must keep the struggle for human rights above efforts to politicize it the way that was done in this case, and it must remain rooted in a commitment to universal principles of human rights that cannot be set aside for the simple matter of convenience. We did publish an article a few months ago commenting on the Netherlands' slipping commitment to human rights, and there was a quote in it from Minister Rosenthal, which I paraphrase, but the accurate quote is in the article, where he says, you know, human rights are important, but you can't talk about human rights all the time because sometimes it gets in the way of trade and business. So I'm glad to have an opportunity to address that issue here in the Netherlands and to reaffirm that we remain unshakably committed to our mission and will certainly not be intimidated by these tactics, whether from the Dutch government or anyone else. Thinking about the issue that was mentioned in the introduction regarding Palestinian statehood, I want to shift attention to that question. As you know, there's been quite a lot of discussion of the Palestinian Authority going to the United Nations to claim some form of recognition for a Palestinian state. And this has been an issue that has created a great deal of discussion, excitement by some, opposition by others, and has attracted a lot of attention. Well, what I want to try to do in my comments is to try to unravel, in a sense, what this is about and what it could mean. And I think I want to make 3 points. One is that it's not clear at all what this initiative actually is. Second, there is a very widespread feeling among Palestinians that if anything, it could be even a danger to Palestinian rights. And third, there is the question of legitimacy. Who has the right to speak for Palestinians, and do the people who are pushing this initiative have the mandate from the Palestinian to gamble with their rights in the way that they are doing? The first thing to note is that we don't know what it is the Palestinian Authority plans to ask for from the United Nations. It might seem like the most basic thing, but they haven't published a text containing their proposal. They haven't, Abbas hasn't made a speech. Mahmoud Abbas, who is recognized by Western funders as the president of the Palestinian Authority, hasn't made a speech laying out what the initiative is. And the Palestinian people as a whole are in the dark. Some speculations, more or less informed, have said that, looking at the traditional route to UN membership, the first thing to note is the United Nations doesn't recognize states. It's not up to the United Nations to declare that the state of Palestine exists. The only thing that the United Nations does is admit member states. So if a state applies, the United Nations can either admit them or not admit them. And the procedure for that is very clearly laid out in the Charter, that the application goes through the UN Security Council. Now, we know that the United States has declared repeatedly and publicly that it will veto any such application on behalf of Palestine, and therefore that route is dead. The question then is what's left. Now what's being talked about is going to the UN General Assembly with some form of resolution. As I mentioned, we don't know what the resolution is, because instead of having a broad debate with the Palestinian people, Abbas is busy negotiating the text of this draft with Catherine Ashton. I didn't know that Catherine Ashton was the representative of the Palestinian people, but apparently that's how these things are now negotiated. And it's an important point. Why is Abbas dealing with Catherine Ashton and negotiating the text of a proposed resolution with Catherine Ashton and not with Palestinian civil society and political parties and what have you? It's because it's a reflection of the reality that the Palestinian Authority is not answerable to the Palestinian people, not even to the residents of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and Palestinians are not the constituency of the Palestinian Authority. The constituency of the Palestinian Authority is the European Union donors, the United States, and Israel. That is the people, those are the people who are represented by the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli army, with which the Palestinian Authority is so proud to be engaging in what it calls security coordination every day, but in the Netherlands, in a former time, had a very different name of when local people do security coordination with an occupying army. It has a quite different name normally. Now, what we can surmise from all this is that at the most, what will happen is a resolution will be presented which reaffirms in some form the right of the Palestinian people to have a state. Maybe it will upgrade the status of the Palestinian mission at the UN from non-member organization to non-member state, or I don't know what, some kind of formula whose practical effect is to change the nameplate in front of the Palestinian delegation that's already sitting there, and very little else. But let's assume a maximalist position, and just for the sake of argument, assume that the UN very formally and very properly admits the state of Palestine as a member like any other member state. Would that make any difference at all? And I think that's a crucial thing to understand. And the argument has been made by some Palestinian Authority officials that, well, if Palestine is recognized as a state, it changes the nature of the dispute with Israel. We become a state under occupation, and suddenly, by some form of magic, the world is going to mobilize against Israel in a way that it hasn't through 63 years of ethnic cleansing and occupation